In this lesson, we will clean up our wrist controls. So you can see in this scene, the fingers have been taken care of on the left hand. A quick trick you may think about using is one that we've already used to mirror the arms, and that we can use locators, mirror them over to the left side, and that way we can at least align the position of our fingers in place, and then we could use the joint orient attributes to take care of the rest. Alright, so let's say we go ahead and reorient our wrist control. We're starting with the wrist because notice if we take the elbow and start to move that, you can see that it's going to drive the rotation of the wrist simply because there's no orient constraint locking the wrist down. So if we ever wanted to, for whatever reason, move our elbow control, let's say if we needed to in order to have the arm rig rest a little bit better inside of the mesh, well, we'd want to do so without interfering with the orientation of the wrist. So that's why we're starting with this section first, to avoid that from happening altogether. Alright, so to get started, what we'll do, since we need to again make sure that the orientation of this object is aligned to our wrist, doesn't have to be perfectly matched to its orientation, just needs to be angled in a way where we get some good rotation from this object. Right now the rotation is very poor. You can see instead of rotating from one axis as we would with the wrist, notice how when we rotate that in one axis we get some nice bending, whereas with this object, to have that same bend happen, we need to rotate from the center. And notice how messy that's going to be for the animator, having to clean up 3 attributes instead when they can just clean up 1 attribute. Alright, so let's say we get started by first selecting our wrist bone and showing its local rotation handle. So now we have something to match to. Okay, great. So now we can grab our wrist control and we'll hit the up arrow to grab its orientation control. So this is what we use to reorient our wrist control to again match to our wrist bone. Now, you'll see that the locator, even though it says that it's visible, right now it's still hidden. Well, that's simply because the shape of our locator is hidden. So let's go to our attribute editor, just Control A, and we'll go to the Shape tab for our locator. Underneath Object Display, we'll want to make sure the visibility is on. Alright, so there's our locator. So with it selected, we can now start to rotate that in place to, again, match it to the angle of our local rotation handle. So I'm aligning it right now so that the locators match to the y-axis and also the x-axis. Okay, so that looks good. Okay, great. Well, at this point, we can go ahead and hide the local rotation handle, and we no longer need the locator, so we can go ahead and hide that the same way. Again, with it selected, we'll go to our attribute editor and hide the visibility of the shape. Alright, so now when we take our animation control and start to rotate it, notice the rotation's much better. Okay, great. So at this point, we can now go ahead and take care of locking down the orientation of the wrist itself. So what we'll need to do is grab our rotation control and we'll press the down arrow to grab our next locator that's responsible for locking down the wrist. Once we hit the down arrow, we'll need to hit the right direction a few times, again to move along that same level in the hierarchy until we have found Loc Ori wrist. If it helps, we can always go to the outliner and find it this way. There it is right underneath the wrist control. So if you wanted to, you could always select the wrist control, frame it till you find your locator, and then at that point, you can go ahead and show it. Alright, so now it's just a matter of applying a parent constraint. So we'll grab our wrist, we'll grab the locator, and we'll create a parent constraint with no offset. Once the locator is matched, we can now remove the parent constraint. Okay, and then at this point, it's just a matter of grabbing the locator, grabbing the wrist, and doing an orient constraint. No shifting. So let's go ahead and hide our locator again, and we're good to go. So as we take our wrist control and start to rotate it, there we go. Everything's moving just fine, behaving as it should. As we take our elbow control and start to move that, notice the wrist will not move because its orientation is locked down. So that's exactly what we want. So it's going to be the same process for the right side. Again, we want to go in, grab our wrist bone, show its local rotation handle. We'll now grab our animation control, hit the up arrow to grab our locator. We'll need to unhide its shape to select it a little bit easier. Then at this point, we could go to our rotate tool and start to rotate the locator to match the angle of the wrist, again in the X and Y axes. Okay, just want to double check to make sure that's good to go. Great. So at this point, we can now go in and hide the locator. Select our wrist control, everything's clean and good to go. From there, with the wrist control still selected, let's go ahead and move down in hierarchy and across to unhide our locator that locks down the orientation of the wrist. Let's go ahead and grab the wrist and also hide its local rotation axis. Alright, so at this point, we'll go ahead and match the orientation of our locator to the wrist bone first. So we grab the wrist, grab the locator, and apply a parent constraint. Once it's been matched, we can now remove the parent constraint from the locator. Gone. Okay. And now it's just a matter of orient constraining the wrist bone. So we first select our locator, grab the wrist bone, and apply an orient constraint. No offset. All right, great. So at this point, we can now go in, take the locator, and hide it. This time from the visibility channel. Notice the rotation is locked down on the wrist, and if we go to our animation control, it's exactly what we want. Again, notice how clean that is. That's going to be a lot more convenient for the animator to clean up animation in the graph editor. Great, so everything is coming together very well. Let's say we stop the lesson here and begin to clean up our arm controls in the following lesson.